Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone as we're preparing for Shabbat, Chazon, Shabbat Parshat, Devarim. Devarim is always the Parsha that's read before the fast of Tisha B'Av. Always, every year, you'll have Parshat Devarim. This year, Shabbat Devarim is actually on Tisha B'Av itself, as Tisha B'Av is being postponed to Sunday. We're starting the fifth book of the Torah, Sefer Devarim, which is really the book, the last will and testament of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, 5 weeks before his death, he starts to review what happened with Klal Yisrael while they were in the desert. And he reviews a lot of the mitzvot. There are some additional mitzvot that are found in Sefer Devarim. And Moshe Rabbeinu starts to give musar, he starts to rebuke the Jewish people in Sefer Devarim. It's very interesting. 5 weeks before he's about to pass away, Moshe Rabbeinu starts giving musar, starts telling people you did stuff wrong. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu wait until 5 weeks before his death? We find similarly, Yaakov Avinu didn't tell anything to Reuven, he didn't tell anything to Shimon Levi until Yaakov Avinu was literally on his deathbed. And then he told them, you did like this, you did like that. Why is Tzaddikim waiting on so long until they say Musar? And yet, we're going to answer all this. Okay, we're going to develop. That's one question to deal with. Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu was giving over the Musar, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it straight out. Moshe Rabbeinu, he veiled all the references. He kind of hid them and said them with different words. Every time he used the word v'dizahav, that's the egel azav, v'lavan, and this and that, the different words he used hinted to the Jewish people what their sin was. So what was going on? First of all, we have to know the Torah already told us in Sefer Vayikra that we have to rebuke your fellow man. Everybody has a mitzvah, tahiyuv. The mitzvah is, if you see someone doing something wrong, you have to tell them. Yet, Rav Pam says, this is one of the most difficult mitzvot to fulfill. Because we're going to come to see that there are some times when you're not supposed to give musar. You're not supposed to tell someone they're doing something wrong. You really have to deliberate and know very well when to and when not to.
Second is why you have to know when to use a gun, because if you use a gun, scare someone and they see in cameras in general.
So you have to know when to do certain things, right? So that's exactly what that's what Pam says. Same thing comes in Musar. You have to know when to and when not to. Now, the Gemara Masech Shabbat tells us very interestingly that when Hashem wanted to destroy the Beit Hamikdash and destroy Yerushalayim during the Churban that we're going to be commemorating on Sunday, which is Shabbat Sunday, Hashem told Malach Gabriel, he said, go and start a fire in Jerusalem and go and put a mark on all the tzaddikim's heads, and so that the angels of destruction don't kill the tzaddikim. And anyone who is a rasha, put a mark of blood on his head, and this way the angels of destruction will know who to kill. So the angel, Malach Gabriel, is supposed to come down and put stamps on everybody's head. You're a tzaddik, you get a stamp that you should be saved, and if you're rasha, you get a stamp that you should be killed. And what happens, the Gemara tells us, the Midat HaDin, the strict justice, came to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, why is it that you're saving some and killing others? So Hashem says to the Midat HaDin, well, these are tzaddikim, and these are Risha'im. And the Midat HaDin says, 1 second, Hashem, these tzaddikim, they had an opportunity to give musar, to tell these people to not do what they're doing, and they didn't. They don't deserve to be saved because they did not rebuke. Hashem says to Midat HaDin, but you know what? I know that even if they would have given musar, the people still wouldn't have listened. The Midat HaDin tells Hashem, you know this. But do the tzaddikim know this? Did the people know this? And since they didn't know this, and since they didn't rebuke, they're hayav mita. And Hashem said, you're right. And everybody was destroyed. Tzaddikim, Rashaim. So come down from the Gemara that we have an obligation to make sure to tell or somehow indicate that someone's doing something wrong when they're doing something wrong. Because if Chas Shalom we don't, it's as if we're signing on to it. If a rabbi is let's say a rabbi goes to a certain place and people are doing averot right next to him and he doesn't say anything, right? He doesn't even indicate that he's not happy with it. They're going to think it's okay. The rabbi was there. He let everything go. It's all fine. So it's very important to make sure that people know that what's right and what's wrong. Now, the Dubno Maggid says, based on this, he says, when Hashem wants to come and destroy Sodom, Avraham Avinu starts to pray, don't destroy Sodom, don't destroy Amorah. You have to keep these cities alive. There are people there. There's tzaddikim there. Hashem says, okay, if there's 10 tzaddikim in each city, I'll save it. Whatever. And Avraham Avinu goes back and forth, 45, 40, 30, the numbers in order to keep them alive. The Gemara asks a question. The Gemara says, why is it the Dubno Maggid asks, why is it that Avraham Avinu never ever told the people of Sodom that you're doing wrong? Why did he wait until they're being destroyed and then he davened for them? Why did Avraham Avinu go and tell people of Sodom, you're doing bad, you have to change? So Dubno Maggid says, based on the Gemara and Yevamot, the Gemara tells us that just as it's a mitzvah to tell somebody musar when it will be accepted, so too it's a mitzvah not to say anything if it won't be accepted. The Gemara brings from Rabbi Abba. He says, there's a pasuk in Mishlei, do not rebuke a fool. Do not give musar to a scoffer, to a fool, because he'll hate you. Right? Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you.
The Jewish people are fools?
People are fools. If you tell someone who's not smart that you're doing is wrong, he's not going to be happy to listen to you. He's going to get upset with you. Why are you telling him what I'm doing is wrong? But if you tell a chacham, you're a wise man, this is beneath you, don't do it. He is going to accept it. Now, the Dubno Maggid's question is, why did the pasuk have to say both? Don't rebuke a fool because he'll hate you. Rebuke a wise man and he'll love you. The Dubno Maggid says, here is the distinction. This is when you say and when you don't say. If you tell somebody who's going to listen, you tell them. If you don't, you don't. Do you know why? Because if there's 100 people here and they're doing averot, and I walk in and I tell them, you cannot do this averot, and I know they won't listen to me, right? So now they're going to label me a fanatic. And now what happens? My credibility to people to listen to me goes down. Abraham Avinu said, if I'm going to go and tell Sodom what they're doing is wrong, what's going to happen? They're not going to listen to me. Then you know what's going to happen? People are going to come to that point where no one listens to me. And then even my own children are not going to listen to me. My own family's not going to listen to me because I became a fanatic in everybody's eyes. And as such, my power of musar is not going to work. Therefore, Abraham Avinu says, I'm not going to give musar to Sodom. Rather, I'm going to keep quiet. This way, at least, my family will listen to me. Sometimes you have to know when to choose your battles. You have to know when to say and when not to say. They say Noah, for 120 years, was rebuking the people, saying you have to do tshuva. No one listened to him. Why no one listened to him? The Pninim al Torah says, you know why they didn't listen to him? Because they first didn't listen to him at the start. They said, oh, what, flood, nothing's happening? Therefore, they continued not to listen to him. Because he was talking to people who wouldn't listen, they already established that he's someone that we don't listen to. That has to be very careful when you say things to people. You have to make sure that they're going to listen. And if they're not going to listen, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, that's why Yaakov Avinu didn't say anything until their deathbed. You know why? Because when people are about to die, everyone listens to them more. All of a sudden the grandfather is important, all of a sudden the grandmother is important, everybody now starts to care, everybody starts to show up. Until then, people just weren't making it, busy, schedule, this, that. Now when a person's about, everybody has time, everybody wants to know, right? The same thing with Moshe Rabbeinu and Yaakov Avinu. They said, when I say it earlier, people are not going to listen, they're going to take it the wrong way. But even so, Moshe Rabbeinu did indicate to the people multiple times throughout the Midbar they're doing things wrong. But the main musar that he kept for right before he was to be niftar. We have to understand that we really, really have to use our brains when we're giving musar. We have to give musar in a way that will be listened to. There's a famous story with Rav Yisrael Mevizhnitz, the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, that he did exactly what the Gemara says. The Gemara says if someone won't listen, don't tell him. One day, Yisrael Mevizhnitz was walking around. He was going on his night stroll, and he stopped at a banker's house. This banker wasn't the most religious man, but he stopped at his house and he knocked on the door. The banker sees the Rebbe, calls him inside. Come inside, we'll give you something. And he says to the Rebbe, what did you stop here for? And the Rebbe is keeping quiet. He says, Rebbe, you want to drink? You want to eat? Quiet. He says, Rebbe, come on, you got to tell me why you came here. The Rebbe says, listen, there's a mitzvah to speak to someone when they're going to listen. And there's a mitzvah not to speak to someone when they're not going to listen. I came here to fulfill the mitzvah of not speaking because I know you're not going to listen. He says, Rebbe, you don't know that. I'm here, you're in my house, just tell me already. Rebbe says, I know you're not going to listen. I'm not telling you. He says, Rebbe, come on. Rebbe says, you sure? He says, Rebbe, I'm going to listen. Why not? You're in my house. I listen. Rebbe says, there's actually a widow in town. And her house, the mortgage on the house, she's not able to pay. The banker wants to foreclose and take away the house. You're a bank manager. I wanted to come to ask you for help. He says, Rebbe, I'm just a bank manager. I don't own the loan. It doesn't belong to me. I work for people there. I'm just a worker. I can't do anything. So everybody says, you see, I told you you're not going to listen. Why'd you make me speak? It was a mitzvah not to speak to you. And the Rebbe thanks him, and Rebbe walks out. This man, the next day, wakes up, and on his own heart, goes and with his own money, pays off the woman's mortgage. Takes care of it, and Baruch Hashem, she was able to live in her house. It was done with thought. It was done with chachma. The Rebbe realized, you can't go in and scream at the guy. He's not going to listen. There's a mitzvah not to talk. There's another interesting story I saw. The story goes that it was a late afternoon on one of the buses in Eretz Yisrael, on the Egged bus in Eretz Yisrael. It was packed with people, and everybody was tired after a long day. There was no real talking or laughing on the bus. Everyone was just exhausted. And in one of the stops, a pregnant woman boards the bus, and either nobody saw her or nobody wanted to see her. Everybody wanted to keep their seats, and nobody got up for the woman. So what did the bus driver do? That's right. The bus driver shut down the bus, parked it on the side, and told the woman, you come take my seat. He didn't tell any of his passengers, get up, come here, you get up, I'm not going to move the bus until you move, until someone finds your seat. He did it himself. He closed the bus and got up and said, come here. As soon as he said, come here, all of a sudden, 10, 15, 20 people had seats for her. Come here. Sometimes, the best way to give musar is being the example that you're supposed to do. Someone needs to be told to do something right, do something different, you do it. You show. And when you do it, then the people will follow suit. It's very important that we do musar the correct way. Now, what happens to someone once they accept the musar? Someone did something wrong, and afterwards they accept the musar. How are we supposed to relate to him? It happened in the yeshiva near here, in Shar Yoshev, that Harav Shlomo Freefeld, there was a boy in the yeshiva who was stealing things. And Rav Shlomo Freefeld figured out who it was, called him into his office, and started to accuse him. At first the boy was denying, but eventually the boy admitted. He cried, he admitted, and he returned whatever he stole. The next Friday night, after prayers, everybody's coming over to the Rosh Yeshiva, to the Rebbeim, and telling them Shabbat Shalom. And when he came to the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Shlomo Freefeld, he embraced him, he hugged him, he told him a big Shabbat Shalom. And the other administrators who found out the story, they went over to the Rosh Yeshiva afterwards and told him, why'd you give him such a big hug? The guy is a thief, he's a ganav. And Rav Shlomo Fifiel told him he was a Ganef. But now he admitted. Now he changed his ways. And we say, once a person admits to his faults, Hashem shows him mercy. That's the same thing we have to do. If we find somebody's guilty of doing something wrong or doing something bad, we cannot forever label them a thief or forever label them a bad person. Once you realize that they accept the Musar and they're trying to change their ways, we have to accept them with love. We'll end off on this topic with another pasuk later on in this parasha. When Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to send the Miraglim, Moshe says the idea was good in my eyes. Rashi says in his eyes, but not in Hashem's eyes. Hashem didn't want them to go. Yet, the Mefarshim ask, why didn't Hashem tell Moshe, don't send them? Hashem says it's not good in my eyes. Moshe said it was good in his eyes. Hashem could have came and said, Moshe Rabbeinu, don't send them. Harav Motel Katz, the late Rosh Yeshiva of Telz in Cleveland, he says a very important chinuch yesod here. He says there are times that children want to do something that their parents deem inappropriate, and the parents want to lay down the law, but sometimes it's better not to say no. Just like Hashem didn't tell Moshe Rabbeinu no, sometimes parents have to not say no to the children. Now children, you don't go and tell your parents when not to say no. That's up to your parents to decide. But we learn from the Miraglim, says Rabbi Katz, that there's sometimes that when the children are doing something that's not totally wrong, but maybe not the right way to do it, better to know when to choose your battles. He says here a story that happened in the yeshiva, that this happened in the 1940s, 1950s, early 1950s. One day, a group of boys came to the Rosh Yeshiva, to Rabbi Katz, and told him they wanted to pray Aravit early that day. So Rabbi Katz said, we have a yeshiva, we have a seder when we pray Aravit. He said, Rabbi, tonight there's a huge fight, a heavyweight championship going on, a wrestling, whatever. And we want to listen. It wasn't television, we want to listen to it on the radio. And he said, we want to listen to it. And it's going to be during Aravit, so we want to know if we can pray Aravit earlier. Now, the request was everyone can realize inappropriate. There's a yeshiva, there's Devarim, we're learning, we're davening. It's not the time. Wrestling between two people is not a Jewish sport. But Rabbi Katz said, I realized that these were American boys in the early 1950s. They came from all over the country. They didn't have a good chinuch in Torah where they came from in their small cities, whatever they were from. If I would refuse them, Rav Katz says, it would become not tasteful in their mouth. Torah would become a problem for them. Rav Katz said, that's when I decided to let them. And I said, we'll pray Aravit early. Now just to know, Rav Katz learned in Telz in Lithuania. Now in Telz, Lithuania, Rav Gifter tells us when he went there from America there, he says it was Kulo Torah. All day it was Torah. There was nothing else in the day except Torah. And Rav Katz learned there. That means he was a man who grew up all day Torah. For him to tell these boys it's okay, we'll pray Aravit early, must have been so out of his character and so out of his way, but he did it. Reason being is, he said he learned from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that sometimes you can't say no. Sometimes you have to let things slide. Now when and how, sometimes you have to say no. They're about to go and do something terribly wrong, you have to say no. You have to but you have to know when certain things like this, when not to say no. So this is not to tell you don't say no to people who are your children or you have influence over, but to know how to. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't rebuke them over the head. He hit it in words, referenced it in ways, made it sound pleasant. The Hafetz Chaim says you want to get to somebody to tell them musar, to tell them how to change themselves, you have to do it with gentle words. The Hafetz Chaim rebuked the people many times. He wrote many essays and tell people you're doing stuff wrong. But he did it with ahava, with love. That's a very, very important yesod. We know there was a king by the name King Achav. He was a Jewish king. And despite how evil he was very successful in battle. King Achav was very successful. And the reason was, what's the reason? Why King Achav was so successful? Because during King Achav's reign, even though he was a very evil king, all the other things, there was unity. Everybody was together. There was ahdut. People got along. When we're united, Hashem wants His children to be united. So if we're united as one, we're not fighting with each other, then Hashem protects us. But if Has v'Shalom, we are fighting with each other, then we lose that divine protection. Chazal tell us the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa received an invitation to a wedding, right? To a celebration. He showed up at the party, and to his humiliation, he was told by the host to leave. He wanted to invite Kamsa, instead Bar Kamsa came. Bar Kamsa said, let me stay, I'll pay for my meal. Let me stay, I'll pay for half the meal. Let me stay, I'll pay for the whole event. And yet the host threw him out. And the Chachamim were there. And the Chachamim didn't say anything. So Bar Kamsa went to get revenge. And he went, and based on what he did, set in motion the destruction of Jerusalem. Harav Yehuda Leib Chasman says, who was Bar Kamsa? Bar Kamsa was a moiser. He was an informer. A Jew who informs on somebody, it's a very big averah. He was a rodef. He wanted to kill people. He got people killed. And yet, in spite of all this, when he was taken away from the community, he was shunned. People didn't unite with him. Rather, they shamed him. When Hashem saw his shame of a moser, of a rodef, a person who makes averot, Hashem saw his shame. Hashem sealed the destruction of Jerusalem, of the Beit HaMikdash, because of one person's shame. A shame of a person who himself was a Baal Avirah. During World War II, the Russian authorities ordered the Rabbanit in every major city to enforce the military draft of young Jewish men to serve in the Russian army. The brisker Rav, Harav Yitzchak Zev Halevi Soloveitchik, didn't want to have anything to do with this. So he left his post as Rav and left Brisk. After the war, he came back to Brisk, and he found out that during his absence, the shochtim, the people who were shechting animals for kosher food, they weren't keeping the halachot correctly. People were selling non-kosher meat as kosher. And when he came, he said, we have to do something about it. So he invited all the Rabbanim to his house, and he said, we have to figure out what to do. All the people show up to his house to start talking about it, and they realize that one of the people who showed up is one of the shochtim, one of the butchers, one of the people who he himself is selling not kosher. So they walk over to him, and the Gaboyim walk over and say, listen, we have to ask you to leave. This is the Rav's house, we want you to leave. And the man said, if this is the Rav's house, let him ask me to leave. If he asks me to leave, I'll leave. And they go over to Rav Soloveitchik, they say, ask him to leave. Rav Soloveitchik doesn't talk. Doesn't say anything. He just sits there. Hours are going by. People are telling, this guy's sitting there, and Rav Soloveitchik's not saying anything. Finally, after a few hours, some of the rabbis said, we have to go. We have other things to do. We have to leave. So a few of the rabbis got up to leave. And while they got up to leave, this man also got up and left with them. As soon as they left, Rav Soloveitchik began the meeting with the people who remained. So they said to him, Rav Soloveitchik, why didn't you tell the guy to leave? And Rav Soloveitchik said, the whole Churban Beit HaMikdash started when one person was shamed, even though he did Averot. You think I want to cause another Churban? You think I want to cause another destruction? This guy, yes, he's selling non-kosher, he's a bad guy, he's doing wrong things. But to embarrass him and throw him out of here, I can't do that. That's going to cause a Churban. That's going to cause another destruction. I can't have that on my head. See how far it goes, Rabotai? How you have to show kavod to everyone? There's a story that happened with the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, another Vizhnitzer Rebbe. Rav Chaim Meir Hager, and he arrived in Eretz Yisrael in 1947. The Hasidus of Vizhnitz set up shop in Tel Aviv. Surprisingly. So Tel Aviv had a big Hasidus population in the late 1940s. Now he had many Hasidim coming to his shul, but also came some non-Hasidim, some modern-looking people. And one day, one modern fellow showed up. It was his son's bar mitzvah, and he wanted the Rebbe to put on tefillin for him. Now the man was wearing what we call a cardboard kippah. You know what a cardboard kippah is, Yamaka? Right, that's the ones that they never wear. It's always folded, and they take it out, just to wear when they walk into the shul. So you can tell this guy wasn't so religious. No, he came to put on tefillin, everything would be fine. But at the same time, he came and he brought a whole spread, a whole meal for everybody to celebrate his son's bar mitzvah. And he sets it up in the shul, but nobody knows what hashgaha, what he used. He just brought his own stuff. Who knows? Cooked at home, cooked where? Kashrus not. What to do? And a big table. And now the Rebbe puts on the tefillin, the shaharit's over. He says, everybody come, say mazal tov, say brachot. Now nobody knows what to do. The Hasidim don't want to touch the food. Who knows, kosher or not? So what do? What does the Rebbe do?
Ask him if it's kosher.
You can embarrass him. He says, what do you mean? You're asking me. First of all, and if he does answer and it's not, you can say, oh, you can't eat it. But you don't want to embarrass him. How do you get away with this? Doesn't this? The Rebbe turns to the Hasidim and says, you all probably didn't yet put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, and you don't eat before you put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. So I have an idea for everybody. Everybody pack a bag, take it home with you. After you put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, then you can do what you need to do. And what happened? Everyone took the food, packed it up in bags. The man was very happy, and they went home, and they got rid of it. They didn't need it. Whatever they needed to do, they did. But this is with Chachma. He didn't scream at the guy. He didn't tell him you bring non-kosher. How you bring Hash Shalom? What you don't follow the rules? What? The guy didn't know better. He tried to do something good. Put them to shame. We cannot do. We have to know how to do things with Chachma, how to do things correctly. One person's shame can cause the destruction of the Churban. Now, we'll say one more story on this topic. Rabbi Moshe Green, a Rebbe in the Yeshiva Shar Yosef, another story from Yeshiva Shar Yosef. This week we have two from Vizhnitz and two from the Yeshiva Shar Yosef. Rabbi Moshe Green shares a story that happened to him. He was living in New York City, and one day he was driving, and all of a sudden he hit a pothole and his tire bust. A Latino man in his 60s pulled his truck up right behind him and said to him, hello, my name is Donnie, and I'm here to help. And then he starts speaking Yiddish. This Latino starts speaking Yiddish. So the man says, how is it? How are you speaking Yiddish? He says to him that I used to work for the Satmar Rebbe. In fact, I was one of the detectives for the Satmar. I was one of the detectives assigned to the Satmar Rebbe's detail. The Rebbe used to travel. They knew that he was a man that someone might hurt. So the police, the NYPD, gave him a special detail. He says, really? So you learned? He says, yeah. His wife used to give me cholent and kugel. And my job was to make sure no one who was harmful would get close to the Rebbe. So he said to him, how did you do it? He said, I used to dress up as a Hasid myself. I used to put on fake peyot. I had a shtreimel, and I used to walk around next to the Rebbe, and I would be his detail. So he says, how could you tell a real Hasid from an imposter? What would you look for? He says, I know a couple of things. He says, first of all, Jews are always looking over their books. They always have a sefer that they're learning from. And if someone's standing a little too straight, then I have my suspicions about him already. Okay? So he says, this is how I knew. I would check. Either he wasn't Jewish or he wasn't serious about his learning. This Latino says. Now, the Rabbi Green tells him, you have a Yiddish cup. You have a smart head. And now this is when the Latino tells him, he says, I once heard from the Rebbe, from the Satmar Rebbe, the reason why you guys don't have the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, is because everybody hates each other. Everybody was fighting with each other. It was sinat hinam. Nobody was getting along. He says, you guys now have the Beit HaMikdash missing for over 1,900 years. Where's your Jewish brain? Your Jewish brain should tell you that if you got destroyed because of Sinat Hinam, then in order way to bring it back is to have love for one another. And this, Rabbi Green said, when he came to this point, I had nothing to answer him. Because he's right. Almost 2,000 years have passed, and yet we still haven't figured how to get along with one another. We have to have ahdut. We have to not shame each other. We have to find ways to love each other. If we do this, we'll be able to answer Donnie's question, and we're able to bring Mashiach. Amen. I want to end with one last lesson on this week's Parshat. In the Psukim, we learn about Ammon and Moab. Ammon and Moab were two nations who come from Lot. Now we're told that when it comes to Ammon, we're not to engage in battle with them. Right? Let's find the pasuk 2:9. Let's look at the pasuk inside. Pasuk says as follows: V'yomer Hashem Elai al tatza et Moab v'al tedgar b'milchama ki lo eten lecha me'aretzo Yerusha ki livnei Lot natati et ar Yerusha. Hashem says, you shall not provoke war with them. He forbade them only to war against Moab, Rashi says. But you're allowed to scare Moab. But when it comes to Ammon, it says you're not allowed to even provoke them. Okay? So Moab, you can go to war. You can't go to war with them. You can scare them. You can come with your knives and guns and everything and scare them. But to Ammon, you're not allowed to do that. What's the reason? Rashi explains that the great-grandmothers made all the difference. Moab and Ammon were the two daughters of Lot. They thought the world was over, and they were with their father to produce children. Afterwards, one of them called her son Moab, which means Me'av, from my father. She said a lot of chutzpah. She didn't say it with respect. The other one said, it's Ammon. Ammon, it's from my nation, which means it comes from my father, but she didn't say it directly. Rashi says based on this, that because one said it nicely and one didn't, that's why they have different laws. The one who said it nicely, you cannot even scare them. But the one who didn't say it nicely and said Moab, Hashem says you can go ahead and you can scare them. What do we see? We see that one different act can make all the difference. You know, people say today, Baruch Hashem, so many people are more religious. You know, we lived in Uzbekistan and there was communism and there was all sorts of laws against Judaism, and people unfortunately didn't keep Torah mitzvot the way they should have and wanted to, and they think today they're better than their grandparents. I heard many Chachamim say, Chas Shalom, that's the wrong way to think of it. Why? He says the only reason why you come back to religion today, why we're all religious today, is because our grandparents, our grandfathers, and our grandmothers would cry for us to come back. When our grandmothers and great-grandmothers used to light the Shabbos candles, the Shabbat candles, they would cry that their children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren should come back to Judaism. That's the only reason why we're here. Is because our ancestors cried. Because Hashem looks at every action. Every action. The two daughters of Lot did the same thing, but they had a little difference in action, already different halachot for them. Every little action that we do, as right now, and what our ancestors did for us before, plays out a huge role of what happens in the future. Mavarya Levin, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim, Zecher Tzaddik L'Bracha, was walking late at night in Yerushalayim, and he sees a woman hunched over with a light, trying to stitch a pair of pants. And he walks over to her and says, why are you working so late at night? Why are you doing these things? And she tells Rav Aryeh Levin, I know who you are, and she has kavod for him. And she says to him, I have a son. And my son I want to send him to yeshiva, and I have no money to pay the Rebbe. So what do? I'm working all late night hours in order to make some money to send my son to yeshiva. Rabbi Levin says, I would watch the son as he would grow, and he became to be the Rav of Yerushalayim, Harav B'Tzalel Zolti. Rabbi Levin says his mother would cry for him, and she worked for him hard. And what she did paid off. He became a huge Rav. Avichil Sapiro, in his first volume of Touched by a Story, he says a little story about a mother in Eretz Yisrael. She was a secular, a Chiloni, and she was traditional, and she would light the candles every Friday night. When she would light the candles, she said she would cry and daven that her son should be like the greatest Jew. And to her, the greatest Jew was then the Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben Gurion. Until one day, she says, her husband came home. Her husband was Zalman Oran. He was the Minister of Education at the start of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And he comes home one day and he says, today Ben Gurion came back from a meeting with the Chazon Ish. And he says, the Ben Gurion said the Chazon Ish was an angel. And the Chazon Ish told them about certain things they should try to do in the government. Ben Gurion listened to some, but not all. But Ben Gurion, when he was talking about the Chazon Ish, said that this is the greatest Jew he ever met. And this guy, this minister of education, came home that night and told his wife that he said the Chazon Ish is the greatest. She says that night, after that, every Friday night when she would daven to be like the greatest Jew, she switched the name that he should be like David Ben Gurion and told him instead he should be like the Chazon Ish. This man became Rabbi Baruch Hyman, a Rav in Yerushalayim. A man involved in many successful Torah projects. He is the grandson of Mrs. Zalman Oran. What happened? A grandmother cried. A grandmother lit candles. A grandmother davened. And Hashem listened. Because Rabotai, every prayer, every action really can make all the difference. I want to end off with one thought that's related to crying that we just mentioned and to Tisha B'Av. You know, every Yom Tov you have a Hefzah Shel Mitzvah. You have Sukkot, you have a Sukkah, you have Lulav, Etrog, Pesach, you have Matzot, Purim, Shalach Manas, you have Megillah. You have something that you can pick up and do. What do you pick up and do on Tisha B'Av? What's the Hefzah? What is the object of the mitzvah that you do on Tisha B'Av? Listen to what the Maharal says. The Maharal says when the Jews came back from Eretz Yisrael, the Meraglim, the spies came back, they were crying. Hashem said, you cried for nothing? I'll give you something to cry for. And we have all the destructions and all the tragedies that happen on Tisha B'Av. But then the Maharal says as follows. You know how you bring back the Beit HaMikdash? I have set for you crying. Hashem says, you cried for nothing? I have set for you crying. Meaning Hashem says, I'm giving you a way back to get the Beit HaMikdash. Which means, how do you get the Beit HaMikdash back? Through crying about the Beit HaMikdash now. When Hashem says He's going to make a time for crying later on, that means that now it is a time to cry in order to get back the Beit HaMikdash. We lost it because we cried for no reason. Now we have to get it back by crying that we're missing it. The Khatam Sofer writes that Hashem literally gathers our tears and takes them and builds the third Beit HaMikdash with them. That's why the Shlach HaKodesh says you're not allowed to cry about the Churban on Shabbat. That's why you're posting off the fast from. There's many reasons why we post, but Shlach says it as this. He says you're posting it from Shabbat to Sunday. You know why? Because if you cry on Shabbat, you're building the Beit HaMikdash, and you're not allowed to build on Shabbat. Because our cries that we cry on Tisha B'Av, those cries build the Beit HaMikdash. That means you have to really feel it. You have to know you have to know what you're missing. You have to know what it is. And when a person does this, he builds the Beit HaMikdash. So cry and wail. For each and every of our tears counts. It counts for our children, our grandchildren, and it counts to bring the Beit HaMikdash back. May Hashem give us a zechut to cry correctly, to do the right things, to review the lessons that we talked about. We talked about how to give rebuke, and when not to give rebuke, and when to give rebuke. We talked about how not to shame. A shame of one person is terrible. But achdut of everybody together is what protects us. And we talked about the importance of one action, of one cry, of one tear. May it be the will of Hashem that we see Mashiach Tzidkenu. We still have time. Right? Tisha B'Av is not here yet. But we should see Mashiach Tzidkenu. We shouldn't see it. We shouldn't see Tisha B'Av. Like it says, Tisha B'Av will become a Yom Tov. We should be zocheh to that. I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom.